Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us for the Operational Resilience for Accounts Payable webinar. My name is Katie Bolt, and I'm the Business Development Associate here at Lear. Just before we get started today, I just want to cover a couple housekeeping things. So everyone will be placed on mute for the duration of the presentation. There's going to be 2 different poll questions happening throughout the webinar, and we would encourage you to participate in those. Also, please submit any questions you have through the Q&A portal or the chat to speakers portal at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get those answered at the end of the presentation. Also, our partner Canon is on the call, so they're able to answer any specific questions there at the end as well. Also, a recording of the presentation will be sent out in a couple of days, and you can find that recording and all past Lear webinar recordings on our Lear YouTube channel and Lear.com. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to one of our presenters, Richard Merrill, to kick it off.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you to everyone who is in attendance today. Welcome to Operational Resilience for Accounts Payable. We really appreciate you taking your time out of your busy day to spend a few minutes with us. Let's start off with some quick introductions. My name is Richard Merrill. I'm a partner with Lear. I have about 25 years of experience on strategy projects, process improvement projects, implementing technology. And within that time frame, I've worked in the AP and larger P2P space for about 15 or 20 years. My co-presenter with me today is Stephen, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Thank you, Richard. I'm Stephen Kwiatkowski. I'm a business process consultant with Lear. I actually report directly to Richard, so I have the pleasure of working with him all the time and kind of learning from that deep knowledge that he has. I've actually had the ability to work on a couple of these accounts payable and procure to pay optimization projects that specifically use the technology that we're going to talk about today. So everything that we're sharing is from hands-on experience with a number of different clients that are pretty different, but in some ways very similar.
Thank you, Stephen. So with that, let's get into the agenda. So we're going to just spend a couple of minutes telling you about who we are. We then want to talk about the benefits of AP automation, because we do believe that automation is one of the keys to making AP more resilient. Stephen's then going to tell you about a specific solution from Canon that I think you'll be very excited to learn about. Then we'll talk to you about how solutions compare against some others in the marketplace, and we'll end with some case studies and some Q&A. So first, a little bit about who we are. So Lear was founded about 15 years ago, and we partner with our clients on their software investments. We help them implement, integrate, and upgrade their software. And we really believe that because we come at it from a holistic point of view, because we offer strategic guidance, because we offer business process improvement advice, change management advice, testing advice, in addition to implementing the software itself, that we really help our clients unlock the true potential of that underlying investment. We come at these initiatives with a deep commitment to excellence and quality. And at the end of the day, we really want to be the trusted advisor. Our goal is to make the process better, to make the work easier, to make the company more efficient and effective. And we believe we have a really strong track record of doing this over the last 15 years. We've overseen and managed a lot of large-scale transformations in finance, in HR, and specifically within AP and the larger P2P space. Let's talk a little bit about benefits of AP automation and why AP automation in particular helps payables to become more resilient. And we know that resiliency is important in times of change. The ability to work remote is going to be critical in the future. In fact, it's critical right now, right? Because of COVID, we were all forced to go remote. But even before COVID, companies were starting to talk about taking work remote as a perk or taking work remote to lower real estate costs. And I think as we emerge from this pandemic, that there's going to be a significant trend to keep as much work remote as possible. And in order to do that, you really need a solution for AP to help take it out of the physical office. I know many of our clients struggled at first. If you were very manual, you were still relying on paper, you're still walking invoices around the office for approval, that it was difficult to go remote. And we think some of the solutions we're going to talk to you about today make that a lot easier. We also think that support and operational functions like AP need to become more lean. Now, some of you might know that term, but for those who don't, lean is associated with Six Sigma. It has to do with getting waste out of the process. Waste is too much time, too much work, too many manual efforts, a lot of tasks that just don't add a lot of value. And by making the process leaner, you can lower your processing costs by about 6 times. And a great way to do that is with automation. And we also know that in times of economic volatility, like we're living through right now, and for those of us on the call who've been at it a while, this is not our first recession. You know, during times of recession, people are asked to do more with less. There's been layoffs, there's furloughs, but the work remains. So what can you do to be more efficient? What can you do to eliminate low value tasks? And we think automation is a key to that. And also that AP, if you think about it, is a high volume process. It's also a very repetitive process. Processes that are high volume and repetitive are sort of prime for continuous improvement, and they're prime for projects that help improve their maturity over time. And one of those big initiatives that will make AP more resilient over time, we believe, is automation. Now, a lot of people wonder about the benefits of automation. It sounds nice, but will it pay for itself? Where will I get my savings? And we think there's a strong business case to be had, not just from soft dollars, but also from hard dollar savings. The solution we're going to be talking to you about today, which is really leading class, best in class solution, the Canon solution, can help get you over to 90% touchless invoicing. If you're doing about 10,000 invoices a year, all the best practice statistics say it takes about 12 minutes to do an invoice. You know, that adds up to a lot of hours. That adds up to potentially 1 FTE saved a year. If you can get rid of 90% of, you know, get rid of 10,000 times 12 minutes, to get rid of 90% of that, it saves up to a person. But there's other actual hard dollar costs to be saved. Reducing physical storage costs at places like Iron Mountain, reducing digital storage cost. But then also there's money to be captured on the invoice side, right? There's late fees to be avoided, but also discounts to be captured. The more you can pay on time or per the terms of the contract, the more likely you're going to be able to capture that. But then there's also soft dollar savings, like simplifying approvals. I have many clients I've worked with over the years who still had different color envelopes for different levels of approval, or you know, you walk it around to offices. You can really eliminate that, and approvers can see it and do the approval within a click of the button, which is really cool. And because of things like OCR imaging that you're going to be hearing a lot more from Stephen about in a minute, you can really improve your quality. We all make mistakes. We all have fat fingers when keying in data. You can eliminate that. You can also build in a lot of data validation with the automation, and you'll be hearing about all of this from Stephen. But reducing errors improves quality and saves time and money. And then also you can remove those sort of repetitive, non-value add tasks. You know, not everyone wants to key invoices 8 hours a day. And some of those people want to be freed up to do less data entry and more data analysis. You know, imagine if your staff can spend all of their time, well, a little bit of their time on exceptions, but most of their time on vendor and spend analysis, making sure contract terms are accurate. There's a lot of soft dollar benefits there as well, just from improving the overall enjoyment of the job. So again, we believe automation is a key to making AP more resilient, and that there's real savings to be had.
Thank you, Richard. So we have our first poll question, which is going to be, where are your biggest hurdles in accounts payable? I'll give you about 15 seconds to answer there. So Richard and Stephen, it looks like we have a pretty big variety here between intake and processing, exception handling, approvals and documentations, and payment. So Stephen, I can pass it over to you.
Thanks, Katie. So I think that that poll really speaks to, how diverse companies are. Everybody's challenges are a little bit different, but we're actually going to talk about all of those areas in some different ways to make your AP process a little more resilient. And some of those things that we're going to talk about do reference a specific solution, and some of them are just kind of best practices for the PeopleSoft space. So on the next slide, you'll see that we have kind of a partnership here with the Canon AP automation solution. So there are other AP automation solutions out there. Some of the things that we're going to talk about will absolutely apply to those other applications as well. We've had some great hands-on success with implementing Canon. And so there will be some references to the Canon solution. There will be some references to PeopleSoft specific things you can do. And then there's some just general best practices across the business process that we'll talk about. But I'll call those out kind of as we get into it. So these were kind of the 5 places, or the 5 steps, if you will, that we wanted to talk about with invoice processing. Intake, obviously a big thing. Processing, so taking the information off of the page, putting it into your ERP. Handling exceptions, I think that speaks for itself. The approval process, whether that's automated or a manual approval process, we definitely have some recommendations there. And then documentation, both to support the approval process, both to support exception handling, as well as for your audit, for your ability to report, for your ability to go back and double check and confirm things. So we're going to take each of these kind of one by one and talk about the business practice, the PeopleSoft opportunities, as well as the Canon opportunities for kind of buffing up your AP process. So on the intake side, the biggest thing and kind of the major point that we want to make is pulling paper out of the process. Richard referenced it earlier, but having AP staff need to be in a physical office, opening envelopes, getting invoices, scanning them, or manually entering them may not necessarily work, in the future. The paperless process is not only more effective just as on its own, but it also opens up things like being able to use an application, being able to use OCR, being able to use technology to really, reduce the amount of manual work. So going paperless is key, absolutely, regardless of whether you're using a solution like the Canon solution, or if you're continuing with the rest of your process as it is. Requesting electronic delivery, that's huge. Getting an email is nearly instantaneous. Waiting for the mail already puts a couple of days into your invoice processing. You want to make that the exception where possible. One thing that I think anybody can do, whether or not they're using an add-on application like the Canon solution, is using your email inboxes and your rules. It does work especially well with something like the Canon solution, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But regardless, you can use email rules to pre-sort a lot of your invoices. One of my clients had an accounts payable setup where they had specific people who kind of managed each BU. Well, all of the invoices for those BUs would come into their dedicated box. Those people were able to process them and kind of pre-sort all of it instead of getting a stack of mail and having to sort through it themselves. The Canon solution specifically can then leverage some of that email information to pre-populate and really help you get a jump on things. But even if you're not using it, there's a lot of flexibility with leveraging email to automate. And then the last thing we wanted to talk about was kind of creating queues. So this goes back to your intake, your processing, separating it out so that you have the right people working on the right items. If you do just have a stack of mail, you don't necessarily know which one's going to be, have a discount associated with it, which one's your final notice and you have a late fee coming up. If you digitize this process, it really gives you a lot more flexibility. And the other thing, from kind of a exception handling perspective, if you're able to digitize the process, you can really build escalation as a digital process alongside it. So this is something that the Canon solution can do really well. You can define queues so that as invoices come in, maybe there's a question, maybe something needs to be on hold, maybe there's an issue with it. An AP entry clerk can actually escalate that directly to the leader manager. And that really separates out the time commitment. The managers don't need to be pulled out of meetings or questioned or interrupted constantly with any of these processing items. There's a queue that is automatically populated with a couple things that they need to put their eyes on. On the next slide, we'll look at processing. So the big benefit of going paperless is that you can use things like OCR. Optical character recognition has really come leaps and bounds in the last couple of years. Canon specifically offers a template-free OCR technology. Iris is the workhorse, you might call it. It's the engine that really pulls information off of a paper or a PDF page and then populates it into a voucher. So being able to do that without a template means that you could have 100 different varieties of invoice from 1,000 different vendors and just be able to process them with a single tool. The real benefit of OCR is elevating the clerk, from data entry to really exception-based processing and analytical work. So like Richard said, typing invoices every day, every hour of every day is not necessarily a good use of people's time. You have the machine do the work that machines do best, and then have the clerk be there to validate if there's an error, to clarify things, to do the coding if necessary. But really you want to separate out what's the best work for a person to be doing versus what's the best work for a machine to do. One of the other things that the Canon solution does specifically is it validates invoice information against your ERP data. So the information that's on the invoice isn't just totally random. It's validated immediately against whatever's in your PeopleSoft supplier and PO data. Basically, this means that you have upfront validation checks that the supplier's real, the PO exists, that there's money on the PO, that the lines are open. And all of that happens, before you finish entering the rest of the voucher information, trying to click save and running into an issue. So that's really kind of what sets the Canon OCR apart from some other applications, is that you have that real-time ERP data that's being validated against as you process. And that's all kind of facilitated with the open imaging integration. So those of you that are on PUM 18 or later can actually use the web services that are provided in that patch to implement a solution like the Canon solution, and have it be have vouchers be created through a delivered supported process, which I think is huge, especially since Oracle's messaging over the last couple of years has been to move away from customization, to move away from anything that might have an impact on your application of PUM patches. The last thing that these kind of OCR tools can do isn't so much external data validation, where they're checking what's on the invoice versus what's in your PO tables, but really kind of internal consistency. So building inside these OCR tools, building these business rules that double check your math for you. That make sure that the numbers add up. That make sure that your date fields actually have dates. Maybe you have a date field from, let's say, a European vendor that has a different format. It can accommodate those kind of things as well. And so that really gives you a lot of peace of mind as these invoices are coming in, as they're being validated, as the data is getting kind of pushed to this voucher creation stage. And it's, you're sure that the supplier is real, you're sure that the PO exists, you're sure that the line's open, and you're sure that everything on that invoice adds up. And I think that's really critical that there's both those pieces of data validation. So that's really kind of the Canon specific piece with, OCR, being able to pull information off of a page. But there are some, non-Canon related things that you should be doing to really make exception handling more resilient as well. One of the big things is, non-PO invoice value. And this applies to basically anybody who has an ERP system. But issuing purchase orders and having a procurement module is completely critical. Being able to match back the coding on the invoice to the coding on the purchase order removes a lot of uncertainty from your AP clerks, and it also removes a lot of rework that happens when you have to recode something, when it's coded to the wrong place. You know, when it's one of those expenses that you only run into once a year and you forget where it's supposed to go, and it makes it all the way to GL before one of your staff accountants has to say, wait a minute, we got to redo this. You know, having the purchase order there and validated and approved takes a lot of that uncertainty and kind of manual effort and rework completely out of the picture. In addition to, you know, general best practice, also being able to use purchase orders with a tool like the Canon solution enables what they call straight-through processing, or the green channel, which basically means if you pull an invoice with clean information and it's got a a purchase order number listed on the invoice, you can validate, all without a clerk ever touching the invoice. You can validate the PO number against your ERP, make sure that the lines are there and they have open dollars, you know, that the invoice amounts match within matching limits, and that a voucher is created and then sent for approval. And that's really kind of the gold standard, or the ideal, but that's possible if you have purchase orders with predefined coding. And it's something that we've seen at our clients, being able to basically completely automate the invoice process so that it goes straight from invoice to the approver, who can double check and make sure everything's there as it should be. One of the other things we wanted to talk about with reducing non-PO volume is that we don't see the Canon solution as, you know, the end-all be-all only tool that you should be doing. You should be increasing your purchase orders, but there are other PeopleSoft functions that also serve to kind of put the right expense in the right channel, if you will. Payment request or check request, you know, for ad hoc payments, that's definitely a good one that we've implemented with some of our clients. Utilizing things like procurement card module to really rationalize your procurement card transactions and bring that all into the application. The expenses module. The real takeaway is that this is one tool in your toolbox, and PeopleSoft offers a ton of other tools that you should really be looking at so that you can make sure that you have the right tool doing the right job. In addition to reducing that non-PO volume, which is going to cause a lot of manual work, creating an escalation process, I think, is key. In the Canon solution, that escalation process looks like a queue, but in addition to that, you know, you can do that just within your AP department, building that process out. And finally, this one is Canon specific again. You know, train the application to be better, which might sound a little crazy to you guys, but basically with these modern OCR tools, you can actually teach it to improve. So if it misreads a value, you can have one of your AP clerks say, no, that's the wrong date, look over here instead. And the next time that invoice comes in, it'll look in the right spot and it'll learn and get better. And that's really kind of critical. You can use your staff's knowledge to make the tool more efficient. Invoice approval workflow. Again, this is something that you can configure in a tool like the Canon solution, or you can configure in PeopleSoft. If you're not using the automated workflow engine, you definitely should be for voucher approval. The flexibility there is just awesome. You can create routing rules based on PO, BU, department, dollar amount. You can set up multiple approvals. We did one where the voucher approval would go directly to the PO requester. The PO requester is the person buying the thing. The invoice needs to go to the person who bought it so they can make sure that it's right. You know, it completely reduced the number of approvals that had to happen because you knew that it was going directly to the right person. The notification framework is great as well. As long as it's all in PeopleSoft, people get those push notifications, they get emails. And if you pull all of the approval into PeopleSoft, if you have workflow, you can build aging reports to really track approval time. And then that lets you build metrics, and metrics lets you really optimize your organization. Finally, with documentation, You know, a document management system is absolutely key. You don't want to be paying Iron Mountain to save a bunch of paper. PeopleSoft has a very cool plugin with the related content feature, and it works especially well with Canon, but you can use it for other document management systems as well. But basically, you can see in browser the invoice image without overloading your application by saving a bunch of images into PeopleSoft. So creating that link is really awesome for the approvers because they get to see both the accounting information and the invoice itself, and it really improves the entire process. Using things like comments on voucher approval workflow, that's just process improvement, making sure there's that communication there between the payable staff and the approvers. On the next slide, you'll see a quick picture of what that looks like. So this is voucher approval. Should look pretty familiar. On the bottom there, you can see the workflow rule that's been applied. You can see all of the accounting in the top left. And then on the right, using that related content, you can see a linked in image of the invoice itself. So there's no question in the approver's mind, what's the expense, where's it going, what's the invoice.
Thanks, Stephen. We have our second poll question here, and that's going to be, do you have any AP optimization projects on your roadmap for within the next 12 months? I'll give about 15 seconds to answer. I'm going to close out the polling. So it looks like we have a split between yes within the next 12 months and no, we're not exploring AP automation at this time. And I'll pass it to you, Richard.
Thank you, Katie. Just getting my video turned back on. So I'm glad that a lot of you are considering it. It's either there or something you are considering. For those who are not, maybe it's something for you to think about. So let's talk a little bit about, what we often hear is, well, there are some other solutions out there. Two of the biggest ones I often come up against are RPA, and Alir has done a lot of work with RPA. And a lot of solutions do incorporate basic OCR technology, but the technology really pales in comparison with the image experts, those image experts being Canon. You trust them for your photos, trust them with your AP imaging. I mean, it really is night and day difference, the capability. Plus a lot of RPA solutions don't incorporate workflow and approvals in a very integrated way, and are not really maybe integrated with PeopleSoft in terms of creating vouchers. So you may have to log out of one system and log into another to do your review and approvals. I have one particular client, we were working with them on other things, but not in this space, but they had spent 3 years trying to put together 5 different solutions: an OCR solution, a document management solution, a workflow solution, an upload into PeopleSoft solution, 4 or 5 solutions, and they were still only in the testing phase after 3 years. And my advice was, why try to build a Frankenstein when there's, a really great off-the-shelf, fully integrated solution available like Canon. The other thing we often hear is, well, electronic invoicing exists, so we're going to rely on that to save time and money. And it is very true that electronic invoicing or e-invoicing, for those who don't know, there's a little bit of a definition there, but at the end of the day, the vendor sends you the documents digitally, but the documents are embedded with information that your system can use to create the voucher. And it's a very good solution, but it's a solution that not all your vendors or suppliers are going to be working with you on. It's not going to get you to 90% touchless. It will get you to improve efficiency for vendors that have the capability, but for your mom and pop vendors, your one-off vendors, it just simply isn't there. And it's just not as holistic a solution. Just like RPA is not as holistic a solution in slightly different ways. So let's talk about a little bit of case studies, because some people say, well, we're really big, or we're really small, or we're unique. Will it work for me? And I'm going to start off here and let Stephen come back in with some color commentary. But here's some sort of 3 different case studies of 3 different industries, waste disposal versus commercial real estate versus utilities, a global example versus just a national example versus an America's implementation. A company that had very few active suppliers to one that has almost 50,000 active suppliers. Company that has less than 5,000 a month invoices to one that has almost 30,000 a month in terms of invoice volume. So high volume, low volume. Clients who have done it as a standalone project successfully or done it along with a 9.2 upgrade successfully. And depending on the size and scope of the effort, it can be done in a matter of months with a relatively small team of dedicated resources. And Stephen, any color commentary you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to say that a couple of these clients actually have RPA departments. They are using RPA. They're not Luddites. They're using the right tools for the right job. But at the same time that they're investing in technologies like that, they also made the choice to invest in OCR and AP automation because in a lot of ways, it is just the best tool for this job.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. That's a really excellent point, Stephen, and very true. So let's talk, and I know we're a few minutes over, so we apologize for that. We'll move through this last slide quickly so we have time for Q&A, but we really believe the key takeaways are, that in order to have AP resiliency, you got to think about automation. And we want you to think about this Canon AP automation solution because it integrates so seamlessly with 9.2. The end user experience stays within PeopleSoft, which really limits the amount of change and the impact of the change for the end user. And it radically reduces the need to touch your invoices manually, which I think is something we all want to do. And, at the end of the day, it's a solution that is going to help make you more resilient and give you better data that's more accurate and more validated.
Thanks, Richard. 2 questions came through, and I just want to make sure we get those answered quickly. So the first one's going to be, does it support multi-language and multi-currency?
So I can take that. This is Stephen. Yes, the application does support multi-language and multi-currency. We did a global implementation where there were a handful of regions, Southeast Asia, Europe, US, Latin America. So it absolutely can.
Thank you, Stephen. And this one should be for you, Richard. What improvements have you seen in terms of quality or turnaround time?
Oh, that's a good question, Katie. So a great example that immediately pops into my head is a client who got 78% same-day voucher. So the invoice from the supplier hits and it's vouchered the same day, 78% of the time. That's pretty cool. And then it gets to approval within 3 days. So imagine having between receipt of invoice to approval within 3 days. And that's possible with the Canon AP automation solution. Really cool.
Thank you, guys. So those were all the questions that were submitted. If anyone has any further questions for Richard and Stephen or the Canon team, we'll be sending up follow-up emails that you'll get the recording and then you'll be able to ask questions then. And just as always, we want to thank you guys so much for joining us today. And as always, just please engage with Aleer on social media. We post a lot of new content weekly, and we have a lot of inventory when it comes to Aleer webinars as well on our YouTube channel and our website. Just thank you again for joining, and have a great rest of your day.